China's population is shrinking as millions enter old age and fewer young people to replace them. This demographic shift has led to the closure of thousands of preschools, with more and more facilities converting into centres for elderly recreation and education. Omar Bakalolo reports.
Once filled the laughter of children, these halls now echo with the sounds of African drums and dancing seniors. As China's birth rate drops and the elderly population grows, educators like Li Shulin have had to adapt. The 56-year-old principal closed her kindergarten last year due to low enrollments.
There are fewer and fewer children, and there's also more and more retired senior citizens. And I myself have reached retirement age, so I know very well the needs of middle-aged and elderly people in our age group.
Li reopened the space as Impressions of Youth, a recreational center for retirees. Now, around 100 adults attend classes like music, dance, and modeling. This center has become a heaven for those looking to relive their youth and fulfill long-held dreams.
I think that in the future there may be a serious need for nursing homes and the need for this university for the elderly. This university is a place that brings people happiness, where people can be active, and having an active body is also a kind of health care.
Beijing estimates that products and services for the elderly could be worth more than $4 trillion by 2035. But reviving the birth rate remains a big challenge for China's demographics. China has one of the fastest growing aging populations in the world. The population of people over 60 years old is projected to reach more than 30% by the end of next decade due to longer life expectancy and declining birth rates. In 1980, China implemented a one-child policy to prevent a population explosion that could drain the country's resources. The policy led the working-age population to grow faster than the non-working population, fueling China's economic miracle. But the move came with significant long-term consequences. The UN expects China's population to drop from 1.4 billion today to 639 million by the end of the century. The aging population worries Beijing because it is draining China of the working-age people. Over the next decade, about 300 million people are set to leave the Chinese workforce, posing a big threat for the economic development. The figure nearly equivalent to the size of the US population. As China's elderly population grows and birth rates decline, the transformation of Li Shulin's kindergarten into Impressions of Youth symbolizes more than just adoption. It sounds alarms for a looming crisis. Ömer Bakkaloğlu, TRT World.
For more on this, let's bring in Manoj Kawal Ramani in Bangalore. He's a China Studies Fellow in Takshashila Institution, a leading Indian public policy education centre. Great to have you with us, Manoj. Firstly, what kind of an impact does an ageing population have on the economy?
Thank you so much for having me. I think your reporter said it quite well, right? There are two sides of this coin, right? One is that you have a shrinking working age population, which means that productivity overall can potentially fall down. There are fewer people to be engaged in productive activities. On the other side, obviously, your market scale also potentially starts to shrink. Also, the composition of the market scale starts to change, right? The story that you had, which talked about a children's school or play area being converted into a nursing home, it's sort of elderly care center. It sort of tells you about how the market dynamic then shifts, and therefore the economy starts to shift. It also the dependency ratio is a big factor, right? I mean, one estimates that, by the end of the middle of the century, China's dependency ratio, which is essentially people who are aged above 65 as opposed to people between the age of 15 to 64, will be at around 52%. So there'll be, 2 working age individuals for every 1 person over 65 years old. So these people need to support healthcare, nursing for the elderly generation. So I think that puts a strain on society. That's your fundamental challenge.
Very interesting. Now, we saw that China's population shrank in 2022 and 2023, even after the government ended its one-child policy and unveiled a series of parenting subsidies. Why did these efforts fail?
I think there's states are very good at coercion, but incentivizing people to take certain actions is always much more difficult, right? States can do coercion very well. And when Beijing implemented the one-child policy, it was a coercive policy, and coercion comes easy, right? It doesn't take as much state capacity and imagination than incentivizing people does. But there are also certain structural factors, right? Social and economical. Raising children is expensive business in China, given the nature of growth that we've seen, given the scale of urbanization. It's extremely expensive to have more children. People are marrying much later. People are prioritizing their careers, educations. So you're marrying much later. Home ownership is a big factor in terms of marriage in China. And again, as housing becomes extremely expensive and people can't afford that, you marry later, you have fewer children. And of course, most importantly, the gender imbalance that the one-child policy created. There are at least 30 million more men in China than women, and these 30 million men need to find mates. So it's very, very difficult, right? And particularly as women get educated and choose to marry later or potentially not marry, we're likely to see fewer children.
Right. Now, in terms of labour force, can the switch to automation cushion the impact of an ageing population and declining labour force?
I think, yes, of course, you can have an impact, right? Automation will have an impact on, at least mitigating some of the challenges of the labor force. But I think there is much more that China can do. And, Chinese policymakers are meeting right now for the third plenum. The reform of the hukou system or the, household registration system is something that is a significant policy change that China can make. Labor mobility is artificially suppressed in China. If they make changes in the hukou system, you can have abundant labor force that is still available. China is still a highly populous country. So I don't necessarily think that this is a immediate threat, and there are many policy measures that can be taken. Another one of them is attracting foreign talent, but that then has socio-political implications in terms of how the system treats foreign talent. China is not like the United States in terms of being welcoming to foreign talent, being a land of immigrants and things like that. There's a social dimension to it. And that, I think, is also something that if that starts to evolve, you might see China attract foreign talent, which can mitigate the challenges.
Okay, Manoj Kawar Romani from the Takshashila Institution. We'll have to leave it there.